My name's Kimo Saper. I'm a solutions engineer here with Quali. What we want to talk about today is how to dramatically improve your scaling using sandboxes for your test automation compared to a traditional scripting approach. So typically when you get started with a test case, you really have your test case and what it wants to do. You know, in a simple example, you want device 1 with configuration A, you need it attached to device 2 with configuration B, and then you got to run your test script to validate something. So in reality, what actually happens? Well, first thing you have to do is you have to go in there and you have to find device number 1. So all right, so I go get a particular device, right? And I get a second one here. Okay, so I found my 2 devices that I'm going to use. And then I need to go ahead and load the configuration for each of those particular config files onto the device to make them ready. Next thing I get to do is actually get to go in there and get them network and talk to each other. Maybe that's a physical connection that's going to get run. Maybe I'm running through some sort of L1 interchange device to get them networked together, and that's fine. Once that's all ready, now we can actually finally just go execute the test script and see if it ran. And that's a pretty typical use case for what we do. So if that's what you're doing manually, when you get ready to code that, you have to translate that into actual things that you have to do in your code. So what does that look like in reality in code? Right, so the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go in there and you're going to have to define your devices. So you got to figure out what those devices that you're actually using are. And that generally means, you know, you're using a config file. We found plenty of our users that will actually hard code that, but you can't scale. So the first thing you're going to do is you have to create a config file for all that. And that's going to have all this information about the device, IP, password, user, enable, all those typical things that you're going to bring in. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to have to bring in some sort of library that knows how to talk to those different devices. Whether it's a Juniper, a Cisco, your own OS, whatever that looks like, you're going to have to bring this command library in and bring that into your script, right? Last thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to figure out some sort of setup, and ideally, you should have a teardown also, right? So you can do the configs, the networking, add in your security layer, whatever that looks like to get this ready now for the actual test script. And the test script here is, you know, your actual mechanics, whether that's a login, enable, run your command, do your measurement, but you know, this is this part right here, and that's all that. And so you're immediately, your single script and code actually has all these very different components. Now, what we want to do is we want to show you how to separate those so they're easier to scale with it. And the first thing we want to do is we use a concept called a sandbox. And essentially, all of these things here that are up and above, we can actually move this into an abstraction layer that can be consumed. And that basically is what we call our sandbox. And in reality, all the sandbox is, very simply, is context. Okay? All of these different things are context pieces that are going to be used later on. Things like exactly what IP address am I on? What is the password that I'm using? What is the command library for that device? All of these things can be context within the sandbox that can be used by your test script. Your test script is going to go ahead and be a script. But at this point, all of this stuff are a set of API hooks into the sandbox. So when you need a particular piece of information about the device, you simply make an API call into it. You actually request, hey, go find me a device that looks like this. Put it in my sandbox. Along with that, you'll have a command library that comes in. You can also create very specialized setup and teardown procedures to make all the different configurations that you would need to get this ready. And you can really do neat things like adding in that security layer, something that's often an afterthought, that you can go ahead and build that right up from the beginning. And once you do that, you basically now have an easy way to consume this into the script via API. This lends a lot of great advantages. So in a pretty typical scenario, once you have it set up this way in this workflow, you know, in a typical test case, you're going to have a couple of different environments that you want to test against, right? And so you're going to have your device level test. You'll move on to like an integration test, and kind of our example is an integration test. You'll have an end-to-end workflow, and you probably have something like a performance test that you actually need to do. These are very simple, different topologies that you'll need to set up and validate against. And then you're going to have all these different capabilities that you're going to do. You're going to have capability A that needs to go through this progression. And then you have capability B that goes through the progression, all the way out to capability N. So in a traditional setup, you're going to go ahead and write that script 1, and then script 2, and then script 3, and script 4. Maybe the script has all of these different pieces, but you're only activating different parts of it. So effectively, it really is its own iteration of that script to do this, right? And so you do the same thing again. Whoops, sorry, numbers are wrong. This is number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, on out to script N. Okay? Well, with a sandbox, because we can break these into two different things, we can now simply create a script for capability A. We basically can create one script here. We can create a script that does capability B all the way out to N. We can create individual scripts that just are these mechanics. That's all they worry about, is just running these particular mechanics. So they're isolated, they're clean, they're easier to debug. Then these pieces can be different sandboxes that you go create. And this will be sandbox 1. And then this can be sandbox number 2, 3, and 4. And now what's nice about this is I can actually offload the sandbox creation over to the actual production side. As a dev, maybe I don't know the hardware that well, right? I'm much better at this. I can let an expert that knows the networking stuff go build one of those sandboxes for me to consume later on. It'll have all the right bells and whistles. It'll always be set up correctly every time. I don't have to maintain that. They want to go update that, they could do that, and I actually don't have to do anything to change my script to get it to run against that. So that improves that. So if we look at this, and now let's talk about the actual scaling. So in a traditional scenario, if you're doing this here, right, a pretty typical case is you may have something like, you're going to have 100 different capabilities that you want to test. You're also going to have easily, I'm going to say 12 environments, right? So let's say you have 4 current production, you have 4 in legacy A, and you have 4 in legacy B, right? So immediately you have 12 environments. Well, if you're doing this, you end up close to 1,200 different permutations or individual scripts that you have to be able to debug and maintain. One of them breaks, you're going to have to go in there, set up that exact permutation, and figure out why it broke there, right? That's a lot to maintain over the long run. If we break it up into sandboxes, well, I have the same 100 capability scripts, but now I have 12 sandboxes. I have 12 sandbox scripts. And all I do is add those together because they're completely independent objects. And so really, I go from 112, or from 1,200, sorry, down to 112. That's an order of magnitude and difference in capability of what you just have to maintain. It's 1/10 the number of items that you have to keep track of, that you have to debug, that you have to certify and maintain over the long run. You know, and really 4 current production and 8 in legacy, that's low for one test plan. That's very realistic. I have seen things that are far worse than this. So this is an easy thing to achieve, and it's simply because what we do is we move these things that are context and we put them in a context layer for you. And then you can focus on the mechanics doing the mechanics. And that's how you can actually scale dramatically by using sandboxes. Of course, if you want to learn more, I would invite you to actually go to our community area on community.quali.com. There's some in-depth items, including our SDK and developer training. And if you actually want to try use a trial for yourself, you can go to quali.com and download a free trial. Thank you very much.